Today on the Weekly Shots, we have a guest with us, somebody who I started following several years back when he first appeared on Red Ice Radio. He's an author, he's a musician, he's a seeker of truth, and I mean, he's got some incredible works. His books here, Pi and the Great Work, Pi the English Alphabet, Volume 1 and 2. He's also got his really well done website of martyleeds33.com, and we want to welcome you today and thank you for taking the time out of your day to come to the Weekly Shots, man.
Hey, thanks guys, appreciate it.
So not a lot of our listeners are familiar with what you do, and I didn't know if you could just take a minute and kind of get them used to let them get to know Marty Leeds. And what is it that you are doing?
That is a loaded question. I actually do a lot of different stuff. I focus on a lot of different subjects and things like that, mainly esoteric subjects, but viewed through the lens of mathematics. So a big focus is on Gematria, which is the art of assigning numbers to letters, and I focus on the English alphabet in particular, though I have a volume 3 that's coming out this month.
Really?
Looks like that. Yeah, I just finished. Actually, just handed it in last night, to the publisher. So,
oh wow!
And I'm actually in that book. I'm covering German, Spanish, Hebrew, and French alphabets as well, and looking at the mathematics of those. So that's in the works, or that's coming out, like I said, this month. So, but basically, yeah, that's what I do. I look at esoteric subjects, mainly like Gematria, numerology, symbolism, and see basically all the connections that you can make with these subjects, and kind of look into them and see and show that a lot of these subjects have been sort of like dismissed in modern academia, and kind of show that these are legitimate subjects to study and how to study them in some respects. So,
yeah, one of the things I remember you somewhat explaining, I think the first time I listened to you, was this the cipher that you found within the English language. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, basically when you look at a lot of the other major languages that have existed for a long time on this earth. I mean, for instance, like Greek, Hebrew, Latin, even like the Semitic scripts and like Egyptian, things like that. The majority of these languages had a cipher, meaning that there was a particular mathematical structure to the language itself, and that holy books and things like that are written with a particular cipher, and each language has a particular number to letter correlation. So Hebrew has a particular one with its 22 letters. Greek has a particular one with its 24 letters, etc., etc. Aramaic, etc. So what I did is focus on English alphabet and have uncovered a cipher that I think is sort of like the quintessential or ne plus ultra cipher to decode the mathematical structure of the English alphabet and look into all the things that have been used with this cipher, especially the Holy Bible. So that's the focus of the work, but that work brings in all sorts of different other things, that comparative mythology and astrology and symbolism and secret societies and conspiracies and that sort of thing. So it's a pretty in-depth study.
And then the question I had when I've gone through some of your books and listened to your work is, how did you stumble upon this? How did you find this?
I mean, the only way I can really explain it is gnosis. In the most clear-cut way, is basically just an open, honest, sincere investigation into all of these things with an earnest desire to know, and not putting any sort of boundaries on my study at all, and allowing my imagination, creativity, just a very focused study on these subjects, and just sort of allowing the information to come out. When I first uncovered the cipher, it was basically focusing on the opening pages of the Holy Bible and how God does his work in 6 days and rests on the seventh. I thought that was a really interesting archetype or motif that was being used, and I ended up using that on the English language, and that's how the cipher originally came about.
And what now? How does this? Because since none of our listeners are really familiar with what this cipher is, can you explain it for them so they could understand it?
Yes. One thing I want to say is that I have a bunch of videos on my site that cover a lot of this stuff. So if you are a first-time listener and are not familiar with this, there's a whole lot of information that's out there for you to check out: books, blogs, videos, interviews, that sort of thing. The cipher is built with a septenary system. Now, in mathematics, you have all sorts of number systems that you use. We basically use, like for instance, if we're on the internet right now, so we're using a binary system. So that's a system of 0 and 1. When you go to measure things and use feet, well, you're using a system of 12. You're using 1 through 12 is your system there. So that's a separate number system. When we look at economics, we use a decimal system. We use the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So when we look out into the world, there's tons of different number systems we can use for tons of different applications. So that's what's important. What I've done is look at the septenary system, or a system of the numbers 1 through 7, and shown how this can actually be used on the English alphabet. So to do this really quick, concise, if you will, basically what I did is I took the 26 letters of the English alphabet and I split them in half, 2 blocks of letters, A through M and N through Z. And there's a lot of reasons why we're doing that. I'm not really going to discuss that here, but basically A through M, N through Z. And then I used that motif of walking up, God doing his work in 6 days and resting on a seventh, and I placed those numbers on the alphabet. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I stopped there. And then instead of going back up to 8, 9, 10, etc., basically what I did is I walked back down to create symmetry. So HIJKLM is 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So basically on A through M you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then you can take those numbers and put it onto the other side of the alphabet. So NOPQRST is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then UVWXYZ is 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that's basically the mathematical structure. And then you could say, and so people have looked at this and said, okay, well, why are you negating 8 and 9 or 10,
exactly,
that sort of thing. One thing you have to understand is that, as I just said, many different systems can be used, many different number systems for many different applications. When you actually look at the other Gematria ciphers for other languages, they actually use something particular as well. They don't use a system of like a decimal system or a septenary system or a sexagesimal system or whatever. They'll actually go a lot of times like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, et cetera, like that. So every system is unique in its own way. And as we can see, this number system is the same thing. It sounds a little esoteric. It sounds really sort of mystical, like, oh, you're walking up to 7 and then back down to 1. And on the outset, it kind of seems that way. But actually, there's not really anything mystical about it whatsoever, because this is actually one of the ways through simple arithmetic that you can square a number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you add those up, it's 49. Well, 7 squared is 49. So really, it's just a different way of doing mathematics. Like I said, seems mystical, seems esoteric or whatever. But really, when you get down to the brass tacks of it, it's not at all. So that's the cipher in a nutshell. For the listeners that are not familiar with this, I think I've come up with, 10 or 12 different ways in which you can actually, different phenomenon in the world that you can use to find this very particular number to letter correlation. Some of those are the Freemasonic square and compasses, dice, the UN logo, the emblem of Israel, the Hebraic tetragrammaton, the Ouija board, the chromatic music scale. There's a ton of different things that, phenomenon in the world that you can use to actually apply these numbers to the letters of our alphabet. So, like I said, it's a pretty dense study. So that's kind of the cipher in a nutshell, anyway.
That's amazing.
It is amazing.
And it's the application that's the most interesting thing about this cipher, and how it can be used in everyday life. I mean, if there was going to be some sort of a message that you want to transmit, that you want it to transcend time, it's going to be held within mathematics, I would assume.
Absolutely, yes.
And through those mathematics, if you keep it simple enough, without overcomplicating it, you're going to be able to transmit messages for millennia if you want to. And now, what are some of the areas where you found that are most striking and surprising to you, where you've seen it applied?
Okay, so I mean, in some respects, like everywhere,
Wow.
But particular in things that I know are antiquated, that have some antiquity to them, and are how do I say this? That they're a system in and of itself. That it's basically that the whatever you're looking at has its own parameters. Let me try to explain this.
Yeah.
So if you look at this cipher and you say, okay, how long has the English alphabet been around? Modern English, what we're speaking right now. How long has this been around? Well, as far as we know, roughly 500 years, approximately, something like that. So, we've had 500 years of this language being used, and we look back and it's like, okay, so how there's certain things in our world that are actually that old, that we could see that this cipher would have been used on. So one of those things, for instance, is the Holy Bible. Another thing is chess. Another thing is billiards. Another thing is dice. Another thing is, there's just a ton of different things in our world that are, like I said, are antiquated, that we could see that if somebody was going to use this cipher to encode certain messages or ideas or cosmological constants or, mathematical constants, that sort of thing, that they could actually encode with this cipher in the system in and of itself, and it would be a closed system. So, for instance, if you're going to look at the Holy Bible, you do not need to. If you have the cipher, you don't need to reach out anywhere else in the world to just look and find out whatever messages are encoded in there, because the Holy Bible is a book complete in and of itself. If you go to chess, if you go look at chess, you're given particular characters, particular mathematics, particular board, particular names of the characters. They have their particular moves. So if you were going to place this cipher and see if there was something encoded in chess, well, you wouldn't have to go to anything else in the world. You could just look at what the names are of the characters, look at etc., and then find the wisdom that's been encoded. Dice is the same way. Billiards is the same way. So we can actually see and go in so far as the names of the days of the week, the names of the constellations, the names of et cetera, et cetera. So this is what's important. So you can actually go and see these sort of closed systems that have their own parameters that you can go and use the cipher on and extract directly from those phenomenon, and like the ones I mentioned, and find that, yes, this was encoded. And the good thing about mathematics, and this is the thing that I always like to stress, is that I'm just some guy talking about this shit, so I could be full of shit. But the good thing is that you can go and double check this yourself. Why? Because it's mathematics, and that's what's so important. So if there is some sort of universal, immutable, knowledge system that's trying to be passed on through the language, well, then that means that anybody should be able to get it, and that's what I'm proposing, is that they can. Yeah. So,
and what makes me think of is throughout the 2,000 years or whatever, there was a large period of time when most of the information of mankind was occulted, which means it was hidden. And so there's a lot of people who wanted to get messages out about what was going on. But if they ever came out about this information, they were usually killed by the Catholic Church. And so they had to probably find ways to encode the message in ways to get it to the people. Something I remember reading is about Sir Francis Bacon when he was organizing the English language in order to translate the King James Bible. I read an article somewhere that said he probably found a way to encode messages within the Bible for people to figure out the information for themselves. I don't know if you've ever heard of anything like that.
Yes, there is. I mean, this is what people, there's a lot of like paranoia and fear about secret societies of the world. Yeah. Because, well, what was that JFK line? Secrets are repugnant in an open and free society. Yeah. Well, you have to understand that there always hasn't been open and free societies. That's true. For a long time there haven't been. So then you see the secret societies that have existed, and I'm not just talking about Masonry here. I'm talking about, and even movements that have been more secretive or more cryptic, as in Gnostic movements, as in alchemy, where you see these illustrations and they're highly, highly cryptic. They're highly symbolic, and you can obviously see that information is being passed on through illustrations, books, cryptic writings, that sort of thing, in a particular way, because obviously they had to be, because this knowledge was under threat. You find that I find the same thing when I go back and I look at the secret societies that have persisted throughout time, whether that's the Knights Templar, whether that's Rosicrucians, whether that's the Ordo Templi Orientis, the Order of the Golden Dawn, the Freemasons, the Scottish Rite, the blah blah Knights of Pythia, blah blah blah. You see all of these different secret societies, and then you say, well, where did they come from? Though you can't, I don't know where the genesis or the origin of all of these secret societies are, but I have to say, I have to look back and see that, yes, I think some of these societies were constructed to be custodians of this knowledge, to conceal it so that it would not be destroyed. And of course, one of the ways to do that is through language. So yes, I mean, as far as like Francis Bacon encoding the Holy Bible, well, the Holy Bible, just as we know, if you throw English out of the equation, we know for a fact that the Holy Bible in Hebrew and in Greek has been encoded mathematically. So therefore, we should probably assume that if there was a new language formed, and there is a mathematics to it, and that new language formed around the same time of the translation and printing of the Holy Bible, the King James version of the Bible would be encoded as well. And that's what I'm saying it absolutely is.
Yeah.
Wow. Mind blown. The one question I had for you, Marty, is knowing this cipher, knowing all this stuff, how could this be used to the normal person? How could this be used in the kind of like the daily life? I've got your calculator here on my phone, and if I punch my name into it, what significance does that number tell me if I punch my name into it?
Okay, a few things on that. The first thing I think that people assume with when you look at like esoteric information, or really, I mean, what this stuff is pointing to is based in theology, is based in man's relationship to the divine. How does he connect to the divine? How does he connect to source, if you will? When so many people, because I've been asked a question like, oh, well, what do you do with this information? As in, like, is this going to give us free energy or something like that? But I think that true knowledge of self and true knowledge of man's connection to the divine isn't something that it's not like a material thing that you get or whatever. It's something that's in within yourself. It's a spiritual acquisition, if you will. And so when people ask, like, what do you do with this, the first thing I have to say is it might not be anything to necessarily do with, other than to expand your own consciousness. But the biggest thing that I like to point out is that I think most people, it's hard to get people to understand a lot of this stuff, because most people do not speak the language of numbers. Most people, if I said to you, what does the number 23 mean? Or why is the number 23 significant? Or why is the number 74 significant? You might not be able to tell me, and a lot of people wouldn't be able to tell me. So therefore, if I flash the number 74 to somebody, that really wouldn't mean much. But I do, colleagues or peers or people that I've associated with that do know numbers, if I showed them a number 2,160, well, we could talk for hours on the number 2,160, because there's a communication, there's a language that's being transmitted. There's there's information that's being transmitted through that language, that medium, which is numbers. So until people start really learning that, that's kind of a hard question to tackle. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, that's very interesting.
I think what we're looking at too here is what you discovered here is maybe what can be considered as an old form of study, an old science. Like, there's certain things that we just don't study in this day and age that the ancient civilizations of the world took extreme importance in understanding, like the placement of the stars and the importance of mathematics. In these ancient civilizations, for a lot of them, it was extremely important just to track the movement of the stars constantly, and understanding what that meant, and understanding basic mathematics and how it is applied to our everyday lives. And I think what you're doing here is uncovering an ancient, I can't even think of the word, but an ancient form of study that needs to be reestablished in society. And you've done it through something that is also important, is you started asking questions and you question what was presented to you as, well, this is the way it's supposed to be, and this is the only way it is, and just any other options aren't available to us. And the more that people question things around them, I think the more things will begin to uncover.
Yes, agreed. I think maybe to answer that question earlier, or that you just asked a little bit further, like what can you do with this study? I can say this, that what it's done for me, without question or controversy, has verified within every ounce of my being that there is a creator, that there is architecture, that man can come to know this architecture, and that not only can he come to know it, I think that's one of the gifts and the blessings that, like, if you will, the source, the creator, the great spirit, whatever you'd like to call that thing, has given man. That's one of the things that actually puts him beyond, or I don't want to say above or better than, or whatever, than the animal kingdom, but gives him the one up, because he can manipulate the material world with his hands, and can actually look down at his hands and count them. See that there's mathematics presented to him. We can look down at a flower and look at that degree of phyllotaxis and see that degree of 137.5 and say, oh shit, it's there, but it's also over there, and it's also over there, and it's also over there. We can see phi. We can calculate pi, which shows man's intelligence. And not only that, it gives, and this is, like I said, this is what it's done for me. It just verified this idea that not only is there architecture, but we can come to understand it. And so therefore it leads you to where does that lead you? Well, if there's architecture, that means there's an architect. And then you say, well, who is that architect? And then I can tell you where it led me. It led me directly to the belief and understanding of God, not even a belief, understanding,
I see whenever you're using that codec that the word Lord equals 13 when you cipher it out, and then God, of course, equals 13 as well, and that in turn equals 26, exactly how many letters there are on the alphabet. That is pretty amazing, that actually came together like that. What's
the other thing too? It just hit me. I think I probably getting this idea from one of the videos that you actually put on YouTube, but you got Jesus Christ and the Apostles is 13, Muhammad and his followers is 13, and it's the repetitiveness of these numbers. And I think another aspect that makes your work important is that it's showing that there is an architect, that there is a God, and we're in this day and age these days where the belief in a higher power, the belief that there is a God, seems to be faltering and dying. And then what it does, it has a societal impact as people move down that pathway of there is no creator, there is no God, and this is the only life I have, and I'm going to live it a certain way.
Yeah, so I mean, it's true, because it does lend itself to like moral ambiguity, if you will, in some respects, which isn't to say that you have to believe in a God to be moral or anything like that. But yes, I think it does lead to that in many respects. You could also make the argument too that believing in God has led to moral ambiguity and terror and fear and all of that stuff as well. So, but then this is where with mathematics, what it did for me was, like I said, I don't believe in God. I can show it. Meaning, like, I can show you architecture. I can show you on your hands. And this is the one thing that puts it out of the realms of faith and belief and that sort of thing, and says, no, we're going to concretize this understanding and this proof. When you talk about a proof of God, where do you think you're going to find that proof but within a mathematical proof? So that's where it goes beyond belief. It goes beyond faith. It goes beyond conjecture and opinion. And I think this about God, and I think this. No. We can come to understand it. And so when I see these principles crafted expertly, perfectly, and into the Bible, into some of the things like we talked about before, chess and billiards and that sort of thing. I mean, that I think one of the things they're passing on is like, no, there is a God. There is a God, and we can come to understand it. And this is the body of information that needs to be taught to humankind again. And so that's one of the, and I think you said this before, but that's one of the things that I want to do with this is present it so that, it's almost like, people can relearn math again. It's like they can start at the ground floor and relearn math in this not cold, convoluted, bullshit way that we learn it in the modern school system. You can start with your hands. You can start with basic principles that are right in front of you.
Wow. Yeah, I like that. There was one thing I was watching, how scientists are somewhat in a bit of a debate with themselves on are we born with math already pre-programmed into our brains, or are we self-taught math? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, math is. This is something that's verifiable. Again, is that math? Man didn't create mathematics. Mathematics comes directly from nature itself. And you don't need to get very philosophical about this at all. All you have to do is really look down and count the petals of a leaf, or petals of a flower, or the arrangement of leaves on a flower. You can look at even the counting and the periodicity of the sun and the moon, and see that, well, the only way, since we'll never be able to go and touch the surface of the sun, we're never going to know the objectivity of the sun. But what we can do to come to understand the sun is actually count it. Even if we're in our most savage and primitive state of man that we've ever been, whatever that is, we can look up and still say 1 day, 2 day. You know what I mean? And so this is the one medium that we can to actually relate ourselves to the heavens, relate ourselves to that spiritual realm. And that's, once again, that's unquestionable. So math comes from nature. Man did not make math. Man is only understanding math, and he learned math from nature itself.
I know if you flip a pine cone over and you count the actual number of seeds that are coming out of it, I know that's is it a root number, or I can't remember exactly what they called the number. I know there's 64, and then if you reverse it, it's 32. It's kind of interesting how that follows that. And I think they said that is it the lily, the flower, the lily, the petals follow a very specific format as far as, development.
Yes, there's a bunch of different patterns of growth, but I think one of the patterns that you're alluding to is the doubling or multiplication or dividing pattern within nature that we find even in meiosis and mitosis. We find that in the human construction. Mm-hmm. So that's one of them. But of course, then you obviously have the Fibonacci sequence, which is we see these patterns within nature, and whenever you see a pattern in nature, what you see is basically architecture. There's this question that, like, there's really no patterns in nature, and man's just a pattern observer, and so he makes patterns where there's no patterns. You could make that argument, except when you bring math into it. If the pattern of phi is everywhere in nature, and we see it all sorts in animals and plants and bugs and insects and all that shit, if we see it all there, then that's not man making the pattern. That's the pattern expressing itself to man so that he may understand it.
That's us discovering it.
And that's what's really important. So, this isn't like a pareidolia kind of thing or apophenia kind of thing. This is actually man looking into creation and seeing the constants and seeing the architecture, and not only being able to see it, but calculate it himself. And then even further, to see it on the human temple. You know what I mean? To see that, to see the mathematics of the hands, to see that phi is on the human body, see it's on the hand, to see that the cochlea of the ear is an expression of the golden spiral, et cetera, et cetera.
It is amazing that we're starting to, figure this stuff out, that it's being figured out. But in a way, it's kind of scary. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. In a way, it's kind of scary that we're figuring out all these explanations for nature. In a way, for myself, I always like to think of nature as, the unexplored, or something that we'll never be able to explain. But we're getting really good at explaining all this stuff, and it's quite interesting.
There's that new age term you hear people talk about, like we're coming to an awakening within mankind. You hear that thrown around a lot, but I honestly think we're looking at a time period where that's very unique, where we have people like you, Marty, and like several other people who they're asking the right kind of questions, and what ends up happening is they're being given the answers to give to people. And it's almost like people like you they're being used as tools in order to express this information so other people can get their hands on it and start accessing this knowledge that's been hidden from the majority of mankind. And I just think it's phenomenal what the work that you're doing, Marty. I really do.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, to me, the only reason that I even shared any of it was because it was so is so life-changing for me, and it made a lot of sense. It answered a whole lot of questions for me. Honestly, it answered questions and gave me answers that I never knew even existed. And so that was so powerful to me. So I felt like sort of a responsibility to just like, start teaching this and share this with people. So, I don't think I understand why knowledge has had to have been, hidden or occulted. I understand, through the historical epoch and everything that's gone on in the throes of history, I understand that sometimes knowledge has to be hidden. But I'm also of the opinion that knowledge belongs to everyone. Knowledge, and everyone should have the ability to come to understand his world and come to understand his his connection with source and God and all of that stuff. And so if we're in a time period right now, as we are, where we can share this stuff on the internet, I think it is imperative, and I think it's a responsibility of people that are going out and making these revelations and making these connections and finding this knowledge. They have a responsibility to share it. And so I think that's where we are now. I know it is kind of campy and sort of fucking cliche to say we are, there's an awakening, but I think there is.
Yeah.
I think there is.
I really do. I mean, there's so many other things that people are beginning to question, such fundamental ideas that we've held since childhood, and they can be very confronting when the information is presented to us. Like literally 2 days before I decided to message you and see if you could come on, I was talking about how retarded the idea of the flat earth theory was and like how ridiculous it is. And then I decided to start looking into it, and then I started stumbling across your work about flat earth theory, and I was like, holy shit, okay, now I've got to start rethinking my ideas about flat earth theory and looking into it, because the videos you have provide a very compelling argument, and it almost forces somebody to kind of start looking at things. And then I also like the approach that you take with it as well. Can you quickly explain that, or as best as you can, concisely?
Well, I mean, thank you. I mean, I appreciate that. I'm glad, it's helping open minds or whatever. I think people, I'm not trying to like be braggadocious here, like pat myself on the back or whatever, but I think people tend to follow what I do and actually take what I say seriously, is because people that have followed me long enough know that I'm a very reasonable guy. I'm very left and right brain, but I'm highly analytical, sometimes hyper analytical. I don't necessarily just go on any sort of whim. I do really like very academic work in a lot of this stuff. And so when I approach something like flat earth and saw all of the issues with the heliocentric model and all the things that have been brought up, I try to approach it the way that I try to approach everything, with passion, with gusto, with care, but also be extremely fair and show the work and try to explain why I'm thinking the way I am. And I think people respect me for that. And that's really all I want. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. In fact, I always tell people, don't believe me. Don't listen to what I'm saying. I mean, listen to what I'm saying, but don't just necessarily take that as, God's truth or something like that. Question it to the core, and then go out and question yourself and do this study yourself, do the research yourself, because that's what's the most important thing. I think anybody that's in the realm of doing like alternative research or sort of bringing this stuff out or dealing with the highly sensitive subjects like esoterica and religion and things like that, I think that if they're telling you what to think or how to think or this is the way it is, that's the first red flag in my opinion. You know what I mean? Like, don't do that, But I think we have a responsibility as researchers to set those Karens on that path, to put a lighthouse on the horizon and point people the way, say, hey, I found a lot of shit this way. It's done a lot of good for me. Go check it out. That's all you can do, and I think that's important for me. So I think that's why people have respected the work I do,
Awesome.
In the videos that, especially the first videos I ever did, I wasn't even in the video. The only thing you ever saw was my hands. And the reason I was doing that is because I kind of wanted to set myself outside of the work that I was doing. And all I wanted to do was to show you my math, to show you the work. Just like if it was in college, if you were going to do, if you had a math course or whatever, and at the end you had to take a big test, you had to show your work. So that's what I wanted to do, and I wanted to present that to people, and I still want to do that. So.
Yeah. And how can people find you and find your information, Marty?
MartyLeads33.com is my main site, and then MartyLeads33 on YouTube. And then I'm starting a Patreon site too, like I said. And so I've got a whole new lecture series I'm working on right now that should go up after my book is out anyway. That should be coming out here probably after the election season, since that's such a cluster.
That's another whole hour-long podcast where we can talk about this one.
I was actually about to say, have you found any numbers when you start adding their names together? Have you found any significance with anything going on in that debate?
I just posted this thing. It was Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton equals 44 in this cipher, and she has 14 letters in her name. 7 in Hillary and 7 in Clinton. And 44 divided by 14 is 3.142. It's pi. So Hillary Clinton's name actually encodes pi multiple times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like in the number of letters of her name, and both first name and last name, and then the combinatory and that whole thing. So it's pretty interesting. I don't know where to take that. I don't know what to say about that. I'm not going to make any claims about that, because I mean, she did have a different name, and she married a Clinton, and yada yada yada. So there's all that. But so I don't like to delve into that too much, because I don't know for a fact if that's coincidence, synchronicity, or if it has been encoded. What I do like to try to do is look at things that have been particularly named, or like we were talking about before, phenomenon that you can actually see if something was particularly encoded in there. So some of the stuff I'm actually looking into, though, coming up is looking at some of the like Rockefeller or institutions, things like that, and some of the names of those, which is insanely fucking interesting.
Oh,
and
yes,
then
it is.
Also looking at some of the NASA stuff. One of the things I'm actually focusing on is the International Space Station, which is all I can say is that thing was definitely encoded and is richly esoteric and filled with I mean, I wouldn't want to say malevolent meaning in the way it's encoded, as far as I see.
You know, for the past 6 months, my life has kind of been flipped upside down. I've been exposed, knowing this young man sitting next to me, I've been exposed to a whole lot of stuff. Now, one of the things that I've been exposed to is, some scientists, and these are actually really known scientists, are kind of staking the claim that we could be possibly living in a software program or
Matrix.
Yeah, like a Matrix type thing. What are your thoughts on that, real briefly? I know you got to go.
As far as like a holographic reality, I think that's true. I mean, just because of the fact that you have like, I don't know if this is a word, but fractalization of reality. You have the microcosm within the macrocosm. You have where the small reflects the large and the large reflects the small. You have this idea, and you see it within nature all the time. So, and the fact that like even a hologram, even the word hologram or holograph, holographic, hollow, it comes from the Greek holos, which is whole, which means it's there's a functionality, holistic functionality on a micro and macro level, which is what we see. It's not like this thing's coming apart at the seams. It's working flawlessly, meaning life. And so graph is graph. It's mathematical. It's just like a 2D or 3D graph. So a holograph is a whole graph. Well, I mean, if you just look at the word, that's true. Absolutely. There is a whole holistic functionality on a macro and micro scale, and we can graph this thing. We can mathematically calculate everything from the birth of a human being to the path of the sun and the moon.
And the death of a star.
When you look at it that way, it does seem like this is not only is it created, but it does seem to be holographic in nature. Yes. So a computer simulation might be a different way to explain it, but basically the same idea.
It's amazing.
All right, Marty, thank you for your time, man. I know you got to go. I appreciate it.
Hey, I thank you guys, and good luck and everything.
Yeah, it's definitely been a pleasure.
Yeah. You take care, Marty.